In the late 18th century, long before Kentucky became synonymous with bourbon, the land was wild and untamed. Native American trails carved through dense forests, creating paths for migrating buffalo herds. These routes, known as buffalo traces, would eventually lead settlers to the fertile lands along the Kentucky River. It was here in 1775 that Hancock Lee built a small settlement known as Leestown. Over time, these lands would become home to one of the most storied distilleries in history. By the early 1800s, whiskey production had become a booming industry. The site where Buffalo Trace stands today had the perfect conditions: limestone-rich water, rolling hills ideal for growing corn, and access to the river for transportation. In 1858, a man named Edmund Haynes Taylor Jr. took over the facility, bringing innovation and quality to the forefront. Taylor believed that bourbon should be crafted with the same care and precision as fine European spirits. He introduced state-of-the-art techniques, climate-controlled aging warehouses, copper fermentation tanks, and strict quality standards. Buffalo Trace was no longer just another distillery, it was becoming an institution. January 17th, 1920, the day America went dry. The 18th Amendment and the Volstead Act outlawed the production, sale, and distribution of alcohol, sending shockwaves through the whiskey industry. Distilleries across Kentucky shuttered their doors. The sound of whiskey aging in oak barrels was replaced by the silence of abandoned warehouses. Thousands of barrels were destroyed, their golden liquid dumped into the streets. For many, this was the end, but not for Buffalo Trace. Prohibition had one loophole. The government still allowed whiskey to be sold, but only for medicinal purposes. Doctors could write prescriptions for whiskey, which could be purchased legally from licensed distilleries. The reason? Alcohol had long been used as a remedy for ailments ranging from colds to indigestion. Seeing an opportunity, a handful of distilleries applied for and received a rare government permit to continue production. Among them was the distillery we now know as Buffalo Trace. During Prohibition, 6 distilleries in the United States were granted permission to continue operating. Buffalo Trace, then known as the George T. Stagg Distillery, became one of the few that endured, producing whiskey under strict government supervision. The demand was overwhelming. Prescription whiskey sales skyrocketed, with pharmacists filling as many as 6 million prescriptions per year. 1 bottle every 10 days. That's what patients were legally allowed to receive. But in reality, many prescriptions were written for reasons beyond medical necessity. Even so, Prohibition took its toll. With fewer barrels being produced, stocks ran low. The warehouses, once overflowing, grew emptier each year. Buffalo Trace survived, but just barely. One of the key figures who ensured Buffalo Trace's survival was Albert B. Blanton, a man whose name would later become legendary in bourbon history. Blanton had started working at the distillery as a teenager, learning every aspect of the business. By the time Prohibition hit, he was one of the most knowledgeable bourbon men in Kentucky. Rather than letting the distillery fade, he kept operations running, bottling medicinal whiskey, maintaining equipment, and preparing for the day Prohibition would end. Blanton believed that bourbon would return, and when it did, Buffalo Trace would be ready. He made sure that the remaining barrels were protected, that production techniques remained intact, and that the craftsmanship of Kentucky bourbon wouldn't be lost to time. In 1933, his patience paid off. December 5th, 1933, the 21st Amendment repealed Prohibition and the country erupted in celebration. For Buffalo Trace, it was a moment of both relief and resurgence. After years of operating under strict regulations, the distillery could once again focus on what it did best, crafting exceptional bourbon. Under Blanton's leadership, Buffalo Trace didn't just return to making whiskey, it set new standards for excellence. The groundwork for what would become some of the most legendary bourbons in history had been laid. Buffalo Trace had survived the darkest period in whiskey history, but its greatest achievements were yet to come. Bourbon is more than just a drink, it's a sensory experience, an exploration of history, craftsmanship and patience, all captured in a single glass. Buffalo Trace Distillery is home to some of the most legendary bourbons in the world. Each one tells its own story, shaped by time, tradition, and the artistry of the master distillers who craft them. Buffalo Trace Bourbon is the flagship whiskey of the distillery. It's crafted from their mash bill number 1, a low rye recipe that allows the deep sweetness of corn and the rich complexity of oak aging to take center stage. Aged for at least 8 years, Buffalo Trace is carefully selected from barrels aging in prime spots within the warehouse, those that develop a perfect balance of flavor, aroma and depth. Nose, a warm, inviting aroma of vanilla, caramel and toffee with subtle hints of dark fruit and toasted oak. Palate, the first sip reveals a silky texture with notes of honey, brown sugar and baking spice. There's a delicate interplay of dried fruit and cinnamon leading to a well-rounded profile. Finish long and smooth with lingering hints of oak, spice and a gentle caramel sweetness. Buffalo Trace Bourbon is often described as the perfect introduction to premium bourbon, rich, approachable and remarkably well balanced. Whether sipped neat on the rocks or in an old-fashioned, it delivers classic bourbon character with remarkable depth. Introduced in 1984, Blanton's revolutionized the bourbon world by being the first ever single-barrel bourbon available to the public. It was the brainchild of Elmer T. Lee, who wanted to honor his mentor, Colonel Albert B. Blanton, by bottling bourbon the way Blanton had always enjoyed it, straight from a single barrel. Each bottle of Blanton's comes from one carefully selected barrel rather than being blended from multiple casks. This means every bottle has slight variations, showcasing the unique character of each aging barrel. Nose, a bold and complex aroma of honey, dried citrus and nutmeg with undertones of caramel and light smoke. Palate incredibly smooth with layers of vanilla, dark chocolate and candied orange peel. A light floral note emerges, balanced by deep oak spice. Finish, long and slightly peppery with lingering toffee, cinnamon and toasted almond. Blanton's is a collector's bourbon, rare, allocated and often hard to find. Each bottle comes with a unique letter on the horse stopper, encouraging enthusiasts to collect the full set spelling out Blanton's. Its elegance, depth and balance make it a whiskey for sipping slowly and appreciating every nuance. Eagle Rare was introduced in 1975 as a 10-year-old bourbon designed to highlight the extraordinary complexity that comes with extended aging. Unlike Buffalo Trace Bourbon, which blends barrels for consistency, Eagle Rare is a single-barrel selection, meaning each bottle showcases the character of an individual barrel. Nose, a deep, rich aroma of toasted oak, dark cherries and caramelized sugar. Hints of leather and tobacco emerge as it opens up. Palate, bold yet refined, with notes of dried fruit, cocoa and toasted nuts. A soft honey sweetness balances out the darker oak flavors. Finish exceptionally long and dry, with lingering flavors of oak, dark chocolate and a subtle espresso bitterness. Eagle Rare is known for its complexity and depth, offering a rich and rewarding experience for seasoned bourbon drinkers. Its single-barrel nature means that each bottle can have unique characteristics, making it a favorite for whiskey connoisseurs. Named after William LaRue Weller, a pioneer of wheated bourbon, W.L. Weller is made with Buffalo Trace's wheated mash bill, the same one used to produce Pappy Van Winkle. Instead of rye, Weller's recipe uses wheat, resulting in a smoother, sweeter bourbon with a rich mouthfeel. Weller comes in several varieties, including Weller Special Reserve Green Label, aged 4 to 7 years, light and smooth. Weller Antique 107, red label, aged longer with a higher proof and bold flavors. Weller 12-year, black label. The closest thing to Pappy, but at a fraction of the price. Nose buttery caramel, baked apples and cinnamon. Palate velvety smooth with rich vanilla, dark honey and warm spice. The wheat gives it an exceptionally soft mouthfeel, finished long with gentle oak, dried fruit, and a creamy toffee sweetness. Weller is often called poor man's Pappy because it shares the same DNA as Pappy Van Winkle, but at a lower price point. It's a must-try for those seeking a rich wheated bourbon experience. Named after one of Buffalo Trace's early pioneers, George T. Stagg is a high-proof, unfiltered, barrel-strength bourbon. This means it is bottled directly from the barrel without any dilution, offering the purest, most intense expression of Buffalo Trace's craftsmanship. Nose dark chocolate, molasses, and espresso with an intense oak presence, palate bold and fiery with burnt caramel, black pepper, and dark fruit. The high proof delivers a powerful warmth, finish long, intense and spicy, with a dry oak tannin and lingering dark chocolate bitterness. George T. Stagg is for experienced bourbon drinkers who appreciate high-proof, cask-strength whiskey. It's a powerhouse, bold, uncompromising, and incredibly complex. What makes Buffalo Trace different from other distilleries? The answer lies in a perfect blend of tradition, innovation, and an unwavering commitment to quality. With over 200 years of bourbon-making experience, Buffalo Trace honors its past while constantly looking to the future. Aging bourbon is more than just waiting for time to work its magic. It's an art form, one that Buffalo Trace has spent centuries perfecting. At the heart of their process is barrel selection and warehouse placement. Buffalo Trace uses a combination of traditional open-air rickhouses, where barrels experience Kentucky's extreme temperature swings, underground brick warehouses where the aging process is more controlled, and experimental environments, including Warehouse X, where factors like humidity, air circulation, and even sunlight exposure are tested. Every bottle of Buffalo Trace bourbon is a product of careful aging in these unique conditions, ensuring a balance of flavor, depth, and smoothness. Buffalo Trace Distillery uses 3 primary mash bills, each carefully crafted to bring out different characteristics in their whiskies. Mash bill number 1, low rye, around 10%, used in Buffalo Trace, Eagle Rare, George T. Stagg, and E.H. Taylor. This mash bill produces a smoother, richer, and more balanced bourbon with deep caramel and vanilla notes. Mash bill number 2, high rye, approximately 12 to 15%. Used in Blanton's, Elmer T. Lee, and Rock Hill farms. This creates a spicier bourbon with bold notes of cinnamon, black pepper, and clove. Lastly, the wheated mash bill no rye, replaced with wheat, used in W.L. Weller and Pappy Van Winkle. This results in a softer, sweeter bourbon with a velvety mouthfeel and rich toffee flavors. While most distilleries age bourbon using traditional methods, Buffalo Trace is pushing the boundaries of whiskey science with Warehouse X, a cutting-edge research facility designed to unlock the secrets of aging. Since 2013, Buffalo Trace has been running over 1,000 bourbon experiments, testing factors like temperature and humidity control, different char levels on barrels, and the effects of natural versus artificial light on whiskey aging. The goal: to craft the perfect bourbon. Every discovery made in Warehouse X influences the future of Buffalo Trace, ensuring that their whiskies continue evolving while maintaining the excellence of their past. Buffalo Trace isn't just a distillery, it's a cultural phenomenon. Over the past 2 decades, bourbon has exploded in popularity, and Buffalo Trace has found itself at the center of the bourbon boom. Today, bottles like Blanton's, Weller, and Pappy Van Winkle are some of the most sought-after whiskies in the world. But with demand far exceeding supply, getting your hands on one isn't always easy. The demand for Buffalo Trace's top whiskies has led to a modern-day treasure hunt. Rare bottles like Eagle Rare 17, George T. Stagg, and Weller 12 are now allocated, meaning retailers receive extremely limited shipments. In response, bourbon lovers have created online forums, trading groups, and even secondary markets where bottles sell for hundreds or even thousands of dollars. But despite the hype, Buffalo Trace remains committed to keeping its whiskey affordable and accessible. ensuring that both new drinkers and seasoned collectors can experience the magic of their bourbons. No bourbon in history has achieved the cult status of Pappy Van Winkle. Produced in limited quantities and aged for up to 23 years, Pappy Van Winkle is more than just whiskey, it's a symbol of prestige. The demand is staggering. Bottles retail for $100 to $300, but often resell for over $5,000 on the secondary market. Fans camp out for days, enter lotteries, and even join waiting lists just for the chance to buy a bottle. But what makes Pappy so special? Its wheated mash bill gives it a uniquely smooth, caramel-rich flavor. Extended aging adds layers of dark fruit, toffee, and oak complexity. Each barrel is hand-selected, ensuring only the finest make it into a bottle. Pappy's mystique has elevated Buffalo Trace from a storied distillery to an elite whiskey producer, capturing the imagination of bourbon lovers worldwide. With the bourbon boom showing no signs of slowing down, Buffalo Trace is preparing for the future. In recent years, the distillery has undergone a massive $1.2 billion expansion, including new rickhouses to store more aging barrels, increased production capacity to meet global demand, and sustainable energy initiatives to preserve the environment. Even with its growth, Buffalo Trace remains committed to crafting bourbon the right way, never rushing the process, never compromising quality, because at Buffalo Trace, history isn't just something to remember. It's something they're still making.